My name is Fiona. I am 32 years old, and for the last 26 years, I have lived with a heavy, invisible weight on my shoulders. It's the weight of gratitude, or at least, the gratitude I was told I owed. You see, I was adopted when I was 6 years old by Gregory and Cynthia. They are wealthy. Not just nice house wealthy, but private country club and original oil paintings in the foyer wealthy. They live in a massive estate in the North Shore suburbs of Chicago, a place where the lawns are manicured with the precision of a surgical strike and the silence is so thick you can almost taste it. I, on the other hand, live in a cramped, drafty apartment on the edge of the city, working as a low-level administrative clerk for a logistics firm. My job mostly involves sorting through endless piles of mail and filing digital invoices for 8 hours a day. It's soul-crushing work, but it pays the rent. Barely. The night this story begins was Gregory and Cynthia's 40th wedding anniversary. A milestone. They decided to celebrate at one of the most exclusive steakhouses in downtown Chicago. Even though I knew I was barely on the guest list, I wanted to show up. I wanted to look like I belonged. I spent a week's worth of grocery money on a simple, elegant navy dress from a clearance rack and another $50 on a pair of heels that pinched my toes. The commute from my apartment to the restaurant took nearly 90 minutes. I sat on the train, clutching a small gift bag containing a vintage pocket watch I had found in an antique shop months ago. I'd spent hours polishing it, thinking maybe, just maybe, Gregory would see the effort. My heart was thumping against my ribs as I walked into the restaurant. The air inside smelled like expensive cigars and aged ribeye. I saw them immediately, a sea of blonde hair and designer suits at a long, mahogany table near the back. There was Cynthia, looking perfectly preserved in her pearls, and Gregory, laughing with a glass of scotch in his hand. Next to them were my siblings, well, their biological children. Chelsea, who is 36 and runs a high-end fashion boutique, and Connor, 34, a rising star in the luxury real estate market. They looked like a magazine ad for the American dream. And then there was me, standing at the edge of the light, feeling like a smudge on a clean window. I approached the table with a tentative smile, my gift bag tucked under my arm. "Happy anniversary, Gregory." "Cynthia," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Gregory gave me a brief, tight-lipped nod. Cynthia didn't even look up from her menu. "You're late, Fiona," she muttered. "The appetizers are already on the way." I tried to hand Gregory the gift. "I found this and thought of you." I started, but he just gestured toward a side table crowded with flowers and much larger boxes wrapped in silver paper. "Just put it with the others," he said dismissively, turning back to Connor to discuss a new condo development in the Gold Coast. I took my seat at the end of the table, feeling that familiar, cold knot in my stomach. For the next hour, I was a ghost. I listened to Chelsea talk about her upcoming trip to Paris and Connor boast about his latest commission check. Whenever I tried to chime in, about a book I'd read or even a small detail about my work, the conversation simply flowed around me like water around a stone. They didn't even bother to look annoyed, they just acted like I wasn't speaking. Then, the door to the private dining area opened. Chelsea's husband, Derek, walked in, followed by Connor's new fiancée, a tall, striking woman named Jade. They hadn't been expected until later, but here they were. The problem was immediate, the table was set for 8, and with the new arrivals, there were 10 people. The waiter stood there, looking flustered. "I'm so sorry, sir, we can try to bring in extra chairs, but it will be quite crowded in this corner." Chelsea looked around the table, her eyes landing on me. There was no hesitation in her gaze. It was cold, calculated. "Actually," she said, her voice cutting through the hum of the room, "we need the space for actual family. Fiona, be a dear and go eat at the bar, will you? It's much more your speed anyway." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at Gregory. He was swirling his scotch, looking at the ceiling. I looked at Cynthia. She was suddenly very interested in the texture of her napkin. Neither of them said a word. The rejection was total. I felt the heat rise to my face, a stinging, burning shame that made my vision blur. Without a word, I stood up. My chair made a sharp, screeching sound against the floor. I didn't look back as I walked away from that mahogany table and toward the dark, lonely corner of the bar. I sat on a high leather stool at the far end of the bar, hidden in the shadows. My hands were shaking so badly I had to tuck them under my thighs. I ordered a basic house salad and a glass of tap water. I couldn't even bring myself to look at the menu. From my vantage point, I could still hear the eruptions of laughter from the main table. They were celebrating. They were happy. And they had forgotten I existed the moment I left their line of sight. I felt like an idiot. 26 years of trying to earn a seat at that table, and it only took one sentence from Chelsea to prove I never had one. I sat there for 2 hours, picking at my wilted lettuce, counting the minutes until I could leave without making another scene. As the party at the main table finally started to break up, the waiter who had been serving them approached me. He looked deeply uncomfortable, his eyes darting toward the floor. He held a black leather folder in his hand. "Excuse me, miss," he whispered. "I was told to bring this to you." I frowned, taking the folder. "What is it?" "I already paid for my salad at the bar." The party at the large table," he stammered. "The lady in the white silk dress, she told me that you would be taking care of the entire bill tonight. She said it was your contribution to the family." I opened the folder. My breath hitched. The total at the bottom was $4,500. $4,500. There were charges for vintage champagne, $500 bottles of wine, and the most expensive steaks on the menu. I looked over at the main table. Chelsea was standing there, draping her designer coat over her shoulders. She looked directly at me and blew a mock kiss, a cruel, triumphant smirk on her face. Gregory and Cynthia were already heading toward the door, escorted by Derek and Connor. I looked at the waiter. He knew. He could see I was a mess. But I couldn't let them win. Not like this. I reached into my purse and pulled out my emergency credit card, the one I kept for hospital bills or car repairs. It had a $5,000 limit, and I hadn't touched it in years. My hand didn't shake this time. It was stone cold. I swiped the card. I signed the slip. I walked out of that restaurant into the freezing Chicago wind. I didn't call an Uber. I walked 15 blocks to the train station, my thin heels clicking on the icy pavement. As the train pulled away from the station, I took out my phone. One by one, I went through my contacts. Gregory. Blocked. Cynthia. Blocked. Chelsea. Blocked. Connor. Blocked. I deleted every photo, every message. By the time I reached my apartment, they were erased from my digital life. But the fire in my chest was just getting started. I woke up the next morning to a cold apartment and a crushing realization of what I had done. $4,500 was nearly 3 months of my salary. It was my safety net, my hope for a better future, all gone because of one spiteful move by a woman who had everything. As I sat there sipping cheap, bitter coffee, I started to reflect on how I had ended up here. I was 6 when the social worker brought me to the North Shore mansion. My biological parents had died in a car accident, and Gregory and Cynthia, distant acquaintances of my father, had stepped up to adopt me. For years, I told myself I was lucky. I lived in a house with a theater room and a heated pool. But I was never a daughter. I was a prop. I remembered my 10th birthday. I wanted a small party with friends from school. Instead, Gregory and Cynthia hosted a massive charity gala at the house. I was dressed in an itchy lace dress and paraded around like a show pony to prove how charitable they were. When the guests left, I was sent to my room while they celebrated with Chelsea and Connor. There were dozens of incidents like that. When Chelsea wanted a new car for her 16th birthday, she got a Range Rover. When I turned 16, I was told that real work builds character and was given a bus pass. Every holiday, every milestone, I was reminded that I was an outsider who should be grateful for the crumbs. Paying that $4,500 bill was the final tax I would ever pay to that family. For the next few months, my life was a cycle of survival. I worked 10-hour shifts. I took on freelance data entry jobs at night. I ate nothing but ramen and eggs. My coworkers asked why I looked so tired, why I was losing weight. I just told them I was saving for something big. I was saving to survive the hole my family had dug for me. There was one person in that entire social circle who didn't look at me like a charity case. That was Aunt Evelyn. She was Cynthia's aunt, a woman in her 80s who was as sharp as a razor and twice as dangerous if you crossed her. Evelyn was the one who actually built the family's wealth. She had started a holding company in the 60s when women weren't even allowed to have their own credit cards, and she had turned it into a multi-million-dollar empire. The rest of the family treated Evelyn like a walking ATM. Gregory and Cynthia only visited her when they needed a bridge loan for a new business venture. Chelsea only called her when she wanted a legacy piece of jewelry. But I visited her because she was the only one who actually talked to me. Every Sunday afternoon for the last 5 years, I would take the bus out to her estate. We didn't talk about fashion or real estate. We talked about history, about the stock market, and about the importance of resilience. We would sit in her massive rose garden, and I would read to her from her favorite biographies. Evelyn wasn't soft. She was tough. She knew exactly what Gregory and Cynthia were doing to me. She would watch them ignore me at family gatherings and her eyes would narrow. Once, she leaned over and whispered, "Fiona, don't you ever mistake their silence for your lack of value. They are small people living in a big house. You are a big soul living in a small world." I never told her about the restaurant incident. I was too proud. I didn't want her to think I was still that desperate little girl looking for someone to save her. I wanted our time together to be about something more than my misery. She was my sanctuary, the only place where I felt like a human being instead of a mistake. 6 months after the anniversary dinner, the news came that Evelyn's health was failing. It was a terminal diagnosis. The moment the word cancer was whispered, the family dynamic shifted. It was disgusting to watch. Gregory and Cynthia, who usually complained that Evelyn was too difficult to visit, were suddenly at her bedside every single day. They brought flowers, they brought specialists, they brought fake smiles and crocodile tears. I received an email from Cynthia, the first contact in months. It didn't ask how I was. It didn't mention the $4,500. It said, "Evelyn is dying. We need you to come to the estate this weekend and help clear out the guest wing. We're expecting a lot of visitors and the staff is overwhelmed. Be there by 8 a.m. I deleted the email. I didn't go to help them clean. But I did go to the hospital. I went late at night, when I knew the vultures would be at their country club, drinking gin and tonic and discussing how they would spend their inheritance. I sat by Evelyn's bed, holding her thin, papery hand. She looked so small under the white hospital sheets. Her eyes opened, and for a second, the old spark was there. "They're already measuring the drapes in my house, aren't they?" she rasped, a tiny ghost of a smirk on her lips. "Probably," I whispered, my voice thick with tears. "Good," she said, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. "Let them measure. Fiona, listen to me. I've made sure they will never be able to look down on you again. I've seen everything. I've seen the way they treat you. And I've seen the way you carry yourself through it. You are the only one with the steel to carry on my name." She passed away 2 days later. The family threw a massive, theatrical funeral. They wore the most expensive black clothing money could buy and sat in the front row, sobbing for the cameras. I sat in the very back, in my simple navy dress, saying my own private goodbye to the only person who had ever truly loved me. I felt like I was completely alone in the world now. I had no idea that Evelyn had left me a weapon that would change everything. If you're following this story and feeling the fire of justice, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with the name of the city you're living in. Every comment helps this video reach more people, and I truly appreciate your support. The atmosphere in Lawyer Bradley's office was electric. It was a high-rise office in the heart of the Loop, all glass and polished chrome. Gregory, Cynthia, Chelsea, and Connor were all there, looking like they were attending a coronation rather than a will reading. Chelsea was literally scrolling through a yacht broker's website on her phone, whispering to Derek about aft deck space. I sat in the corner, feeling like an intruder. I had only come because I had been formally subpoenaed by the estate's legal team. I expected Evelyn to have left me a small memento, maybe a few $1,000s, enough to pay off that credit card debt. Lawyer Bradley, a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite, cleared his throat. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He opened a thick, leather-bound folder and began to read. To my niece, Cynthia, and her husband, Gregory, Bradley read, his voice flat and professional. I leave the sum of $1 each. The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop on that plush carpet. Cynthia's mouth fell open. Gregory's face went from pale to a deep, angry purple. To my grandniece Chelsea and my grandnephew Connor, Bradley continued, I leave the sum of $1 each. The will specifies that these amounts are given to acknowledge their existence and specifically to preclude them from contesting this document on the grounds of being forgotten. Chelsea let out a shrill, strangled cry. This is a joke. She was senile. That old woman was out of her mind. Bradley ignored her. He looked directly at me. To Fiona, he said, and for the first time, his voice softened slightly. I leave everything else. This includes the controlling interest in Evelyn Holdings, all real estate properties, all liquid assets, and all personal effects. The estimated value of the estate is $75 million. The room exploded. Gregory slammed his fist on the table. Cynthia began to wail. Chelsea was screaming at the top of her lungs, calling me a manipulator, a thief, a parasite. I just sat there, frozen. $75 million. I wasn't thinking about the money. I was thinking about Evelyn. She hadn't just given me wealth, she had given me my life back. I stood up, walked past my screaming family, and walked out into the bright Chicago sun, a multimillionaire. 3 days later, I was sitting in my tiny apartment, eating a bowl of cereal. I hadn't moved out yet. I hadn't even bought a new pair of shoes. I was still trying to process the scale of what had happened. Then, the banging started. It wasn't a knock, it was someone trying to kick my door down. I looked through the peephole and saw Chelsea and Derek. They looked manic. I opened the door just a crack. Chelsea shoved her way in, her face twisted with rage. She didn't look like a high-end boutique owner anymore, she looked like a cornered animal. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was the receipt from the anniversary dinner, the $4,500 bill. She threw it on my small kitchen table. You think you're so smart, don't you? She hissed. You manipulated a dying old woman. You're a fraud, Fiona. You just sort mail for a living. You can't handle real money. You're going to sign a renunciation form right now, or we're going to make your life a living hell. I looked at the receipt, then back at her. I didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel like a people pleaser. I felt bored. Actually, I said, my voice calm and steady, I think I'll keep the money. I own the estate now, Chelsea. Chelsea let out a harsh, jagged laugh. You own what? A few old chairs and some jewelry? That's not an estate, you pathetic brat. I looked past her at Derek. He was a finance guy. He knew the players. I own Evelyn Holdings, I said clearly. Every single share. Derek's face went bone white. The color drained out of his lips so fast it was like someone had pulled a plug. He knew exactly what Evelyn Holdings was. He knew they owned half the commercial real estate in the city and had a massive stake in his own firm's parent company. He grabbed Chelsea's arm, his voice trembling. "Chelsea, shut up. Shut up right now. Fiona. I mean, Miss Fiona, please." She didn't mean it. "We're just stressed." He looked at his wife, his eyes wide with genuine terror. "Chelsea, apologize. Now." I didn't wait for the apology. I pointed at the door. "Get out. Both of you. And take your trash with you." I gestured to the $4,500 receipt. They scrambled out of the apartment like they were fleeing a burning building. The next morning, I met with Bradley at the Evelyn Holdings headquarters. Walking into that building as the owner was a surreal experience. People were bowing, opening doors, calling me ma'am. We sat in the boardroom, and Bradley laid out the portfolio. Then, he showed me something I hadn't expected. The massive mansion in the North Shore, the one Gregory and Cynthia had lived in for 30 years, wasn't theirs. Aunt Evelyn bought it in the 80s, Bradley explained. She allowed Gregory and Cynthia to live there under a life tenancy agreement that was contingent on her goodwill. Since she has passed, and all her real estate assets have transferred to you, the title is now in your name. They don't own a single brick of that house. I leaned back in the plush leather chair. I thought about all the times I had been sent to my room so they could host parties. I thought about the night I was kicked out of the anniversary dinner and forced to walk to the train in the freezing cold. "They've spent 30 years telling me I'm not real family," I said quietly. "It's time they lived like it." I looked at Bradley. "Issue a formal 30-day eviction notice. Tell them they have 1 month to vacate the premises. No extensions. No negotiations. If they want to live in a mansion, they can go buy one with the $2 Evelyn left them." Bradley didn't even blink. He just nodded. "I'll have the papers served by this afternoon, Miss Fiona." The war had officially begun. They had spent 26 years trying to make me small. Now, I was going to show them exactly how big I could be. Within 24 hours of the eviction notice being served, the internet exploded. Gregory and Cynthia weren't going to go quietly. They hired a PR firm and launched a full-scale smear campaign. Chelsea posted a 10-minute video on Facebook, sitting on the floor of her boutique, crying without any actual tears. She told the world that I was a predatory outsider who had used undue influence and elder abuse to brainwash a woman with dementia. She claimed that I had isolated Evelyn from her true family in her final days to steal their inheritance. Cynthia went on a local news station, playing the role of the heartbroken mother. "We took her in when she had nothing," she sobbed into a silk handkerchief. "We gave her a life of luxury, and this is how she repays us? By throwing us out onto the street? It's a tragedy." My phone was flooded with messages from distant cousins, old friends of the family, and even total strangers who had seen the story online. They called me a snake, a gold digger, a monster. My boss at the logistics firm even called me into his office, looking worried about the negative publicity reflecting on the company. I sat in my apartment, watching the notifications pile up. For a moment, that old feeling of being the bad guy started to creep back in. I felt that familiar urge to apologize, to make it stop, to give them what they wanted just to have peace. But then I remembered Bradley's words. "Let them dig their own graves, Fiona." We were silent. We didn't respond to the videos. We didn't give interviews. We were busy in the archives, looking for the real story. Bradley and I spent the next week in the climate-controlled basement of the Evelyn Holdings building. This was where Evelyn kept her personal archives, boxes upon boxes of documents dating back decades. Evelyn was a meticulous record keeper, Bradley said, handing me a small, locked iron box. She didn't just track her businesses. She tracked everything. She told me once that information is the only currency that never devalues. The box had a simple label, "For Fiona. When you are strong enough." My hands were trembling as Bradley used a skeleton key to pop the lock. Inside were folders of bank statements, private investigator reports, and legal documents from the time of my adoption. As I began to read, the world around me started to tilt. I had spent my whole life believing that Gregory and Cynthia had saved me out of the goodness of their hearts. I had been told, 1,000 times, that I was a burden they had graciously chosen to carry. The documents told a different story. A much darker, much more calculated story. I found a life insurance policy taken out by my biological parents. They had been successful architects, and they had prepared for the unthinkable. They had left a trust fund for me, $600,000 in 1998. Then I found the guardianship papers. Gregory and Cynthia hadn't just taken me in. They had fought for legal guardianship. Not because they wanted a child, but because the guardianship gave them legal control over my trust fund. I looked at the bank statements from the following 10 years. It was a roadmap of theft. $600,000 had been systematically drained through a series of reimbursements for my care. $50,000 for private tutoring that I never received. $100,000 for specialized medical treatments that were never performed. Another $200,000 for estate management fees. They hadn't used that money for me. They had used it to pay off Gregory's gambling debts and to fund Chelsea and Connor's elite private schools. They had stolen my parents' final gift to me and then spent 26 years telling me I owed them everything. The rage that built up in my chest wasn't hot. It was cold. It was ice cold. I looked at the documents showing that by the time I was 18, the trust fund was gone. Not a single cent was left. That was why they told me I couldn't go to a top-tier university. That was why they told me I had to get a job and pay them rent for my room in the mansion. They weren't building my character, they were covering their tracks. Evelyn had known. She had hired a private investigator 10 years ago to dig into the adoption records. She had found the paper trail of the stolen $600,000. Why didn't she tell me? I asked Bradley, my voice a ragged whisper. She wanted to, Bradley said softly. But she knew that if she told you back then, Gregory and Cynthia would have destroyed you. They had all the power. She waited until she could give you the resources to fight back. She didn't want you to just know the truth, Fiona. She wanted you to be able to do something about it. I looked at the smear campaign videos still circulating on my phone. They were calling me a thief. They were calling me ungrateful. They think this is about a house, I said, standing up. They think this is about an inheritance. They have no idea what's coming. I turned to Bradley. I want to file a countersuit. Not just for the defamation. I want them charged with fiduciary fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. I want every single cent they stole back, adjusted for 20 years of inflation and interest. And I want the world to see every single one of these documents. The poor, grateful orphan was gone. In her place was the owner of Evelyn Holdings. And she was going to collect her debt. The deposition didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in a sterile conference room on the 50th floor of a skyscraper. Gregory, Cynthia, and Chelsea were there with their high-priced lawyers, looking smug. They still thought they were the victims. They thought they could shame me into a settlement. Gregory sat across from me, his face a mask of arrogant disappointment. Fiona, let's end this circus. Give us the house and a reasonable stipend, and we'll drop the suit. We don't want to ruin you, despite what you've done to us. I didn't say a word. I just looked at Bradley. Bradley didn't reach for a settlement offer. He reached for a stack of blue-bound folders and slid them across the table. Let's discuss 1999, Bradley said, his voice as sharp as a razor. Specifically, the transfer of $150,000 from Fiona's trust fund into Gregory's business account to cover a margin call. Or perhaps the $80,000 used to pay for Chelsea's boarding school in Switzerland, again, taken directly from a fund meant for Fiona's welfare. The smugness evaporated instantly. Gregory's face went a sickly shade of gray. Cynthia's eyes went wide, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. This is ancient history, their lawyer stammered, his confidence visibly crumbling. No, Bradley replied. This is a felony. And because the fraud was concealed through active manipulation of a minor, the statute of limitations has been told. We have the forensic accounting. We have the forged signatures. We have the private investigator's testimony. Bradley leaned forward. Here is the deal. You will drop the contest of the will immediately. You will issue a public apology and a full retraction of all defamatory statements. And you will pay back the $600,000, plus interest, which comes to approximately $2 million. Derek, Chelsea's husband, stood up without saying a word to his wife. He looked at the documents, looked at the looming legal disaster, and walked out of the room. He was a finance guy, he knew a sinking ship when he saw one. He filed for divorce the next day. The next 6 months were a masterclass in karma. Once the truth about the trust fund theft went public, Gregory and Cynthia's social standing vanished overnight. The North Shore elite, who value nothing more than their reputation, dropped them like they were radioactive. They couldn't pay the $2 million. They had to liquidate everything. The luxury cars, the designer clothes, the memberships to the country clubs, it was all sold off to pay the debt to avoid criminal prosecution. They moved out of the mansion in the middle of the night to avoid the cameras. They ended up in a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment in a part of town they used to mock. Gregory took a job as a night security guard. Cynthia started working at a department store, folding clothes for women she used to have lunch with. Chelsea's boutique went bankrupt within months. No one wanted to be associated with her brand. She lost her house, her husband, and her influence. Connor's real estate career ended the moment the fraud story hit the front page of the business section. I watched it all from a distance. I didn't feel joy, exactly. I just felt a profound sense of balance. The scales that had been tipped against me for 26 years were finally level. 2 years have passed since that anniversary dinner. I don't live in the mansion. I turned it into a residential center for foster youth who are aging out of the system, a place where they can get an education, learn financial literacy, and find their footing without being exploited. I still work hard, but now I'm working for a purpose. I run the Evelyn and Fiona Hope Foundation. We provide legal advocacy for children who are being mistreated by their guardians. We make sure that no other child has to spend 26 years living a lie. I'm standing on the balcony of the foundation's new building, looking out over the city. I'm wearing a simple dress, but I don't feel like a smudge on the window anymore. I feel like the light. I recently received an email from Cynthia. She didn't use a silk handkerchief this time. She said they are destitute. She said they are hungry. She begged for one final conversation to heal the family. I looked at the email for a long time. I thought about the little girl who just wanted someone to love her. And then I thought about the woman who had the strength to save herself. I didn't reply. I hit delete. Some debts can never be repaid with an apology. Am I wrong for refusing to ever speak to them again? Should I accept their apology? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button and let me know your thoughts in the comments below.